IVM.
Guys, it's almost been a month, more or less, with this global lockdown that we are facing. And all of us are trying to find our ways of keeping ourselves involved, trying to know who our partners are and spending time with our parents and to understand ourselves. I think one thing apart from live football that we do miss is inviting guests over. But that's what we can do on the podcast, right? Since Karthik and I are tired of looking at Shiva and listening to his over and over again, we decided to invite a guest on this episode. And that guest is none other than one of the most recognized faces and voices in the football industry, the very elaborate, extremely assertive Mr. Joe Morrison.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. Thank you again so much for taking time out.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And this kills a couple of hours of my day. So that's 2 hours of today where I won't be bored. So I'm looking forward to this.
We're very glad you said that. We were hoping one of us could come up with that, but I'm glad that you did. So we have the next 2 hours with Joe Morrison, without the live football. Usually when you have Joe for 2 hours, you have live football going on.
It used to be a romantic Champions League night for the longest time.
Romantic?
The romantic.
I love the late night, the Champions League nights.
Joe, I'll tell you why it's romantic. Shiva is an Arsenal fan. I'm a United fan. And Karthik is, you won't believe, a Fulham fan. So any Champions League night is extremely romantic for the three of us. Yeah. But there's no romance.
For Karthik, no European romance, except for one season.
In 2010, yeah.
Roy Hodgson.
They went to the finals.
Correct.
Yeah.
Was it the Europa League?
Yes.
Lost to Atletico 1-0.
So you've had a brief taste of what the rest of us feel.
Who do you support, Joe?
Who do I support?
Mm-hmm.
Newcastle United. I was born in the city.
Yeah.
I worked for the club for 4 years. And it was the most amazing experience it was the worst job I've ever done in my life, and I'm sure we'll get into this deeper later on. It was the most amazing experience of my life, but it was the worst job I ever did in my life. But those 4 years, we were in Europe every single year. Champions League.
Mm-hmm. That was fun. No, there is something that we want to really know from you about your time at Newcastle. Not too late in the episode, a little early in the episode actually. But we'll take a short break. Before going into the break, Karthik's one season with Fulham in Europe suits his philosophy. Karthik believes that you do one thing right rather than doing it wrong the multiple times, which is a slight remark on what Shiva and me and my clubs do. But we'll talk about that, Joe. We'll get into a quick break, and on the other side, we'll talk through his career, a really long career, his time in India, and a bunch of questions that are on our minds and also on our listeners' mind. So let's see you on the other side of the break.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Paytm Money. So we had a really interesting week on the network. Definitely check out some of the shows that came out there. We had interesting episodes on Cyrus Says, Advertising is Dead, Filter Coffee Podcast, Agla Station Adulthood, Mr. and Mrs. Binge Watch, Pesa Vesa. All of these shows had some really, really cool guests on, and there were some really good episodes out there. Do check them out. I'm sure you'll enjoy them. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Okay, we're back on this lockdown special episode with Joe Morrison. Joe, we did speak very briefly about your time at Newcastle. And before we get into that, I want to actually know about your time on BBC Radio Live 5. We know you were one of the youngest presenters, or maybe the youngest presenter in their history. What I really want to know is was it different for you, who didn't come from like a typical media broadcasting background, to have one of the most successful stints on BBC Radio Live, which was known for live sports back then?
It was very strange. I don't know if you know the backstory to this. It was very strange because most of the people at that time that went into the BBC, they went through journalism or media college or, a university course. And then they got onto the equivalent of a scholarship. It had a special name. And then that's how they worked their way into the BBC to become a producer, reporter, and then they worked their way up to be presenter, anchor, etc. So you went from producing to reporting in radio, to presenting in radio, and then to producing in TV and reporting in television, and then presenting in television. So that was kind of the ladder. Now, the way it happened for me was when I did agriculture at university, by the way. So by trade, I'm a farmer.
Wow, that's excellent.
A qualified farmer. So what happened was when I came out of university, it was the crash. We're in a crash at the moment, but it was the financial crisis in the early 90s. So when I came out of university, there were no jobs. There were no jobs in the agriculture industry. And my father had also been made redundant at the same time as well. And what he did with his redundancy money, he bought a newsagents. I don't know if they have or they call them newsagents in Asia, but like a news kiosk or a news shop where they sold newspapers, cigarettes, chocolate, magazines, that kind of thing.
Right.
So, and he didn't have anyone to run it or to manage it. So he asked me to do it. Now, cut a long story short, I used to do the early shift, the 4 a.m. I had to get up at 4 a.m. every day.
Wow.
And there was a guy who came in who was called George Bailey. And so one of my favorite Christmas movies is It's a Wonderful Life, because it's a fabulous movie and a great story, but also because it has this connection to George Bailey. George Bailey is one of the characters in the movie. Now, George Bailey, Whispering George Bailey as he was called because he had this husky voice, he was one of the pioneers of BBC Radio 5 Live. And he was one of the pioneers of golf on the radio. So when they put this idea to the BBC, and this was probably the late 80s, if I remember, when he put this idea of doing golf on radio, people said, you can't do it. Golf is a very visual sport. It's not a sport that you can do on the radio because the commentator can't shout and scream and talk many of the times. But they devised this way, and it was a great learning experience, which I'll come back to in just a second. So Whispering George used to come in every morning really early. He was an early bird. And he would talk to me when the shop was empty. I'm talking like 6 a.m. before the rush hour. And he would talk to me about sport for what seemed like ages at the time, maybe 20, 30 minutes every day, whatever was on the back pages of the newspapers. And over time, he would say, you know what? You should get involved in radio. I work at the BBC. You should come in and do a trial and all that kind of thing. But I was never into it. I think when I look back now, guys, I think I didn't believe in myself enough. Mm-hmm. So I always said no. I always said, it's not my thing. It's not where I see my career going. I didn't see my career being a newsagent, but I certainly didn't see my career in radio. But anyway, he did this for like about 2 years. And he said, look, I can get you into hospital radio because that's where most amateurs started in those days. You start on hospital radio, and then you start freelancing in BBC was the other route to get in if you didn't go down the college route. So he badgered me for about 2 years, and then I said, okay. I was sick of getting up at 4 a.m. I said, yes, we'll give it a try. So that's how it all started, really. So coming back to where your question first began, I am now very appreciative that I didn't come through the college media course route. And I'll tell you why. It's because I was a fan of sport before I became a broadcaster or a journalist or it became my profession. I think there's too many journalists do not have this connection with their audience. They don't have, we call it the buzzword for us, and we'll come on to what I'm doing now a little bit later on. But the buzzword for us is authenticity. And that is so damn important right now. So important. And we'll discuss it more later on. But, we had someone, and I'm just trying to, in a simplistic way, describe the culture of the UK. We would have someone who was maybe from a rich family who went into a media journalism course, and then all of a sudden they were knocking on the door as a reporter of some bereaved mother from a really poor, rough end of Newcastle, trying to empathize what it's like to not have any money, to not have any job, and your son's just been killed. How does this rich kid empathize with that? I can't empathize with those who work on the streets of Bombay, for example, selling whatever they can just to make enough money for food, because that's not my background. And I'm guessing it's none of your backgrounds either. So having that empathy of knowing what it's like to sit in a bar and drink beer and be excited and elated and to be despondent and desperate when your team wins, your team loses, you get a draw, all of those emotions are built inside of me. And I still, to this day, I know 2 or 3 presenters, anchors, who don't drink. And I'm like, what? 90% of your audience are at home getting drunk watching this game right now, or in a bar getting drunk watching this game right now. Mm-hmm. You are trying to give this authenticity that you empathize with them and you understand how they are and what they're about. It's like, it's bullshit. So anyway, that's how it all began.
Joe, I'm going to quickly put you on the spot because I love that story. And I'm possibly going to go back and look up Whispering George Bailey commenting on golf. If they have any clips.
He's passed away now, actually. I went to his funeral. I went to his funeral in Newcastle. This is many, many years ago. It was before I came to the Middle East. And just by pure chance, I got put in the seat in the church. I got put in the seat next to Sir John Hall. And Sir John Hall was the most amazing guy that bought and revived Newcastle United. He was the owner of Newcastle United until he sold it to Mike Ashley. So we had a great conversation. Yeah. But it's amazing. It's amazing how I'm a big believer, guys, in sliding doors moments. Uh-huh. How one thing
leads to another. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was going to put you in a spot though, because those stories are amazing. But 3 of us are in Bombay, Bangalore, or everyone mostly who's listening to this is most likely in India. I doubt a majority of them have ever been to UK or London or wherever it is that they support, whichever team they support and wherever that team is based. For instance, I'm a huge Arsenal fan. And I'm lucky that I have seen them play in Singapore, but I've never been to the Emirates. Where does the authenticity come into play now? Because we're still podcasters. We're not at the level of, doing shows yet, but we're still running a podcast. And how do you think there is a difference between someone who's been there and soaked in the atmosphere of a live game, let's say at a Champions League night, and someone who's been watching it on TV? Do you think there's a difference between that as well?
Yes, I do. So if you're broadcasting, and everything is broadcasting nowadays, whether you're on YouTube or we're on Zoom today, Facebook, Insta TV, or mainstream TV, it doesn't matter. It's all some form of the same thing. You're on camera, you're creating content. The difference is it's what you're broadcasting about. If you guys are selling yourselves as what it's like to be fans and the fans' perspective of the respective clubs that you follow, that's fine. If you're trying to push forward what it's like to be standing in the tunnel doing an interview with Sir Alex Ferguson at Old Trafford, then you're talking nonsense because you've never been there. And that's the biggest issue I have with certainly in Asia, in the Indian subcontinent. It's like, how can you talk and ask questions to an ex-player if you've never been in that environment? I mean, I had an executive producer. The guy was an idiot. In the last few, it was just on his business card. Executive producer. In the last few months, I was at 10 Sports. 10 Sports when they were before they were taken over by Sony ESPN. And this guy's authenticity, if you like, was based upon a stadium tour of Old Trafford.
Wow.
And he'd done a lot of reporting, football reporting, and all the rest of it. Now, he was also a big fan of other sports, like, say, for example, I don't know, tennis, hockey, whatever. Now, I would never question his authenticity and his understanding of the game of hockey. I don't have that authenticity. It's like cricket. I've never been to a cricket match in the Indian subcontinent. I've never seen a hockey match live. So how can I talk with authenticity about hockey or cricket or anything like that? I would never even try. So when you're talking to me about broadcast, stick to what you know, stick to your zone, because a football player doesn't know the emotions that a fan has gone through over the course of the last 20 years. They were a football player.
Right.
So their authenticity has to be questioned when it comes to being a fan. So I don't like footballers saying, well, this is what the fans feel like. How do you know that? How do you know that? You've never been a fan. Now, there are obviously one or two players who might have been a fan, being taken as a kid when you're 6 years old with your father before you became a professional football player. Right. It's a very different experience to spending the last 20 years of your life, going to the game, losing, in the case of being an Arsenal fan, losing, and then getting drunk afterwards. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Authenticity is the most important thing now. You have to be a true representative of who you are, which is why, coming back to the presenter thing, anchors, presenters, if you can't feel emotion because you're not going crazy after your team has just lost and getting drunk and how that feels and, like questioning the season ticket prices and all that. If you've never experienced that, how can you relate to your audience?
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely love the answer. What I also love, and I think this is an important part of authenticity, is honesty. And I can absolutely vouch in the last 15 minutes that Joe has a ton of honesty, because I love with the directness that he's picked on that answer.
Too much honesty gets me into trouble a lot of the time.
and I'll also note that if you're taken without your father, then it becomes a Liam Neeson movie.
Oh my goodness!
I think I should just shut the screen now. I think we should end it. Nothing's going to beat that.
Joe left the meeting.
I think the most authentic part about any technology is the mute button.
Where is the mute button? Have I got the mute button?
No, but you may make a very interesting point about authenticity, and you also spoke about drinking beer in pubs, and it reminds me of the story by this very senior advertising executive called Phil Dussenbury in the US, and he spoke about his BBDO, which is a global advertising giant, if I may say so, and their sister agency in London, who were looking to revamp the beer brand Guinness, and they were trying to come up with the line, and these two copywriters were sitting in a room for about 3 days trying to crack a line, and they couldn't come up with anything. The dustbin was filled with piles of paper, and they decided to go to a bar where people actually drink, and probably get an idea there. And they sat at the bar and they saw people coming in ordering for the beer, and they poured it in the glass and they waited for the froth to settle down. And from there, they came up with a popular line which says, "Good things come to those who wait." So, yeah, I think being there...
By being immersed in the experience rather than in a boardroom. Brainstorming. I have a tendency for physical violence sometimes, and it's usually when people mention the word brainstorm. Let's brainstorm.
It's good to know, Joe. It's good to know. Early on.
There's a lot of those stupid, nonsensical words or concepts that actually do and mean nothing.
This is buzzword bingo you're referring to.
Manas Gera, I hope you're listening in.
I've never heard that. Buzzword bingo. I like that, actually. I'm going to use that.
Absolutely. Feel free. Because that is now buzzword bingo. Literally, the words buzzword bingo are a part of that. So be careful.
Yeah. No, I've been in so many meetings. And coming back, actually, you're going to ask me about Singapore later on. I'll tell you this story. Remind me about this story when we'll get to Singapore.
Sure. You really want... It makes me ask you that right now because you are in a flow. And I hope that story is going to be really interesting. But no, I'll keep that for the latter.
Look, otherwise, I'll just jump around, guys. So
that's
we love that. We love that.
It's the advantage of being on a podcast.
All right, I'll tell you the story now.
Yes, please go ahead. We're all ears.
Right. So, for most of my career, this Facebook project, I absolutely love it because, one, it's very, very difficult, very challenging because of data more than anything else. But the other side of it is coming back to this authenticity thing. So with the Facebook project, we answer to the audience. Now, for the majority of my career, and I've been doing this nearly 20 years now, I answered to senior management. Mm-hmm. So when senior management, and you'd be amazed, the two most, coming back to buzzword bingo, the two most powerful words in my particular industry which don't get used a lot, but they are very powerful, are subjective and objective. Mm-hmm. Now, you can say, I don't like this show. I don't like this presenter. Come to me with your data, your science, your facts that show me that you don't like it. Has someone wired your brain up and there's a rise in testosterone levels or whatever the case may be? You know, I'm not a scientist. So that's being objective. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people mistake the two things. And especially when it comes to the emotion of football and football broadcasting, they say, this is not good. Well, that's a subjective statement. It's not an objective statement because you've got no science to back that up. So, coming back to what I was saying, I spent the majority of my career answering to senior management. And senior management would sit in meetings and go, we don't like this aspect of the show. We don't like this pundit. We don't like that. The audience doesn't like it. Now, the greatest thing that's ever happened in my industry is social media. And we jumped on Twitter, and you'll remember the C2K days with Carlton and Budgie, the Monday night show.
Absolutely.
That show, not the content of the show, but the format of the show was ahead of its time because we were using social media as a direct. It was live. There was no send us your questions and we'll go through them, and then tomorrow night we'll put them on air. It
Use
was
hashtag C2K.
It was live. It was happening right then. So people were tweeting in. Now, the greatest thing I learned from that was this is the audience. So when you get 10,000 comments and 9,000 say, I hate your show, or I hate you, Joe, or whatever, you've got a problem and you need to address that problem. If 9,000 say, I love the show and I love you, Joe, or no, I love this aspect of the format, then that's what you have to go with. So in those early days, and I'll give you an example. So we'd formatted this 1 hour show with C2K, the Monday Night Football show, and Extra Time, I think it was called, wasn't it? C2K Extra Time on a Monday. And we formatted this 1 hour, and we had this little 5-minute segment that we had no content for, none. We couldn't think of something to put in that segment. And it was getting closer and closer to the start of the season, and we just didn't have any content. So I said, look, let's just get a flip chart and do an either or, and just compare some of the greatest players of all time, Ronaldo or Messi, Kenny Dalglish or Ian Rush, Maradona, Pele, whatever. We'll go through. And there was a lot of joking and laughter and like, this won't work. You want to use a flip chart on television? That's not good production value. It's a stupid idea, whatever. Anyway, we'll use it until we come up with a better option. And those comments came from predominantly senior executive producers and executive production management. That segment became longer and longer and longer, and it became the most popular segment of the show. Why? Because it got the biggest reaction on social media, on Twitter. They weren't interested in us. They were interested in us analyzing one of the big games of the weekend on the tactical formation graphics. But they weren't as interested as being able to argue about whether Ian Rush was more important to Liverpool than Kenny Dalglish was. So there's a classic example. Nowadays, it is everything. I don't listen to anyone except the data that comes in from the audience. So after every show, I go through the comments live on Facebook. It takes me hours, by the way. So I look at the data, the numbers of who was watching, when they were watching, how long they were watching for. That's all the scientific stuff that gets sent to me from Facebook. But I also go through the comments as well to get a feel of the pulse of the audience. Did they like this? Did they not like this? Was this too long, too short? What's the mood? To get a sense of that mood. So, some power that be, and going back to Singapore, I remember a meeting we did once, a conference call meeting that we did once, and one of the executives in the meeting had talked about something that Budgie had done on a show. Now, I had asked Budgie a question. I'll never forget the game. It was Chelsea against Liverpool. It was a snowing day. It must have been back in about 2007, 2008. And I'd said to Budgie, I'd asked him the question, if you were in that dressing room now as the manager, what would you be saying to the players? Now, Budgie, we all had bottles of water, to drink during the show. He picked up his bottle of water and he said, you see this water? I would get in the dressing room because it's full of bottles of water just like this, and I would throw it across that dressing room, and I would swear and shout at the top of my voice because Chelsea are not putting in any effort. And he threw this bottle across the set and it made a noise and, the table wobbled and, typical Budgie. And I'll never forget the meeting on the Monday morning. One of the executives in the meeting had said they were speaking to their neighbor who was disgusted at the behavior of John Burridge and wanted him suspended for the next 3 weeks. And the reason was their neighbor was a Liverpool fan, and he was saying that basically Liverpool weren't trying hard enough, they weren't good enough, and all the rest of it. So you see where subjective and objective comes in? So this executive had formed an opinion because their neighbor had watched the show the night before. Liverpool had lost the game, by the way. So their neighbor was pissed off and then had formulated a subjective opinion which they happened to pass to the executive of a TV channel. How crazy is that? How crazy is that? The executive then wanted, we didn't suspend him, by the way, but they wanted him suspended. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And that's
it's a snowball effect.
It just, that's the world we live in, unfortunately.
So we're glad you took the decision to not suspend Budgie. I think the format was a breath of fresh air. Not that it did not have your usual analytics and insights on the game, but it offered something more to a generation.
It had the audience in the show. That was the fundamental difference.
Absolutely. And I think with the
most important aspect of that, Gaurav, was for the first time in the Indian subcontinent, the audience was like an extra guest on the show. That had never been done before that. And I'll tell you why. We weren't the first person to use, say, for example, you'd see shows where they would say, send us an email giving us your thoughts. But that was all pre-prepared. It's still being done now, by the way, in sports broadcasting in the Indian subcontinent. Send us your tweets. The tweets are then gathered hours or sometimes a day before, and then they make a list, and then they ask those tweet questions. The social media is now.
Yeah.
It's instantaneous.
I can't agree more with that sentiment. But that is fantastic because how long ago was this, Joe? When you first started taking questions off Twitter? I think this was 2011, 12, 13?
Yeah, that's when I wrote him once and I remember Joe didn't reply. So I got very angry. I'm sure it was some contest that too. There was something on offer. Otherwise I wouldn't have written it.
You're the one. You wanted me suspended. He didn't answer me and I didn't win the competition. So therefore he needs to be suspended. Probably about 2000, because I joined Twitter in 2010. So it must have been about 2010, 2011 season. And the reason that it worked as well, I mean, some things are just, they say timing is everything. You've got to remember 2010, 2011 season was peak Barcelona. We had the La Liga rights from the year before, which we'd never had before. It was just the most phenomenal football that you will ever see in your lifetime. You will never see that again. I will never see that again in our lifetime. So all of those things together at the same time, there was so much to talk about. There was it was a changing of the guard as well in the Premier League. Things were moving and shaking. So Man City, was starting to gain, and
Chelsea had just won the Champions League 2012, right?
Chelsea, the Champions League. When was the Champions League semi-final Classicos? Was that 2011? Was it?
In 2011, it could have been
the semi-final of the Champions League. I mean, when I think about that now, I didn't realize at the time, but when I think about that now, bloody hell, 2 legs.
Yeah,
Real Madrid against Barcelona with all of the Galacticos in those two sides. Jose Mourinho is one coach, Pep Guardiola is the other coach. Wow,
Yeah.
Wow, we were so lucky. I'll be honest with you. I think looking back, I took it for granted. I took that Barcelona team for granted. I took that whole era of football. I took that stumbling across the social media integration into broadcasting for granted. I don't think I really appreciated it as much as I do now.
Yeah, that makes you and the Arsenal squad that made it to the 2005 Champions League final, who took Barcelona for granted.
Yeah. I mean, Arsenal, they were brilliant at that Invincibles period as well. I think there was a lot of Arsenal fans took that whole period for granted.
Yeah.
So, and what I mean by that, Siv, is that sometimes, yes, it's great and you have this emotion of winning, but you don't really fully understand how and why you won, and you didn't really go into some kind of, reflection on why you won. But now that you look back years later,
I have a lot of time to reflect. I can assure you of that.
Now that Arsenal are shit, you have got a lot of time to reflect.
Finally, you said it, John. Also, I love that you're still sticking with your chai. Is that something you picked up while you were in India?
No, it wasn't. Actually, I went to Darjeeling a few years ago, and this is a funny story. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I went to a place called Ilam, right up in the north, and I went to visit this tea plantation. I'll never forget the smell. So what it was someone had invited me to help them open. They built on the side of this hill, this really steep hill. They carved out a football pitch. What? It wasn't a full-size pitch. It was more sort of 7-a-side size pitch for the local villagers to play on. So they asked me to go over and, say hello and to kind of open it type thing.
Right.
So I went to and I was trekking in that area, or I planned a trek in that area anyway. So it all worked out. So I went to do it. We played this game of football on this dirt pitch. Well, of course, with it being on the side of a very steep hill, it was, only one step away from a mountain. Every time the ball got kicked on the right-hand side, it went off and down like a 100-foot drop down the side.
Wow.
And these little, I don't know what age they were, 9, 10-year-old boys would run off down the side. And I'm like, they're gone. And then appear back after 5 minutes with the ball, and then we could continue the game. But anyway, at the end of this trip, I was only there a few days. At the end of this trip, they gave me this silver foil pack of grade 1 tea. I finally learned about tea at that time. 150 years ago, people that drank tea, there were a number of grades of tea. And obviously, the elite, the British Raj and all that, they all drank this grade 1 tea. Whereas apparently, I didn't know, but most tea now is like a mixture of grade 3 teas. Someone is going to message in now and educate you and I on the tea. Don't quote me. Don't quote me on my facts here.
I was just about to say, Indian tea plantations love the white man going there. So we always look forward to that.
Where was I? Oh, yes. So they gave me this about the size of an iPad, a pack foil of grade 1 tea. And they said, this is the best tea that you can get anywhere in the world, grade 1 from our plantation. I hope you enjoy it. So I said, thank you very much. Much appreciated. By the way, I hope no one from this plantation is watching this. So I got back to my little hotel room, and then I was packing to go back to Dubai because I live in Dubai. And this pack of tea was completely sealed, obviously for the freshness, and was totally unmarked. And I just got this fear of God came over me. I thought,
I was just about to ask you that. Was it a grade 1 tea or stuff?
I arrive at Dubai Customs, and this is ganja, yeah, and in this foil pack, and of course they're going to ask me, where did you get it from? And I'll go, well,
from the hills in India.
From the hills in India. And why is it not branded? I don't know. Have you opened it? No. Can you imagine?
Sure.
So I left it. behind me in the hotel room. I wasn't brave enough. I shit myself.
Suddenly, I could see that an episode of, I don't know if you guys have watched this on National Geographic, it's called Banged Up Abroad.
Yeah.
That was exactly what I was thinking. That's exactly what I was thinking, trying to explain to my mother in my one phone call from jail. So what the hell happened? Well, this guy gave me a pack of tea, can you imagine?
It was grade 1.
That was the same Jailed Abroad, right? It used to be called Jailed Abroad.
Yeah,
and more often than not, it's British nationals who get caught there for some reason in that entire show. There's always British nationals. Yeah,
must be a BBC produced show.
Dishonest, untrustworthy, those bloody Britishers. Bloody Britishers.
No, but okay. So this podcast has gone awry altogether, which is great, which is fantastic. right? What TV doesn't offer us is what a podcast does. There's no scheduling. There's no time limit. So this is fantastic. But from untrustworthy Britishers, I'm going to go to trustworthy British. This is your time at Newcastle, and I'm really interested. And because not just in the past couple of episodes, but even before that, we're talking about top teams during the 2000 to 2010 time in the Premier League. And Newcastle had a good run in the early years, about 2002, 2004, where they were in Europe. They had a decent team. They had Shearer, I think, who was still scoring 40 goals in a couple of seasons. And they had Craig Bellamy, who was remarkable for his on-field and off-field
annoying little bastard
shenanigans. But what was your job at Newcastle, apart from, I'm guessing, protecting Craig Bellamy's personality?
You know the funny thing? I got on really well with Craig Bellamy. I don't know why. I just...
You're a golfer.
No, it wasn't that. I do play golf, but no, I didn't play golf at that particular time. So Nobby Solano had a birthday party at this restaurant. So he hired out the whole restaurant. It was a private party. And Craig Bellamy had knee surgery at that time. And he was still in his leg brace. So he was recovering from the surgery, but he still had this protective knee brace on. And he was at the party and he got drunk and he was being a real tit. And basically, and I was drunk as well. And he was annoying me and just abusing me. And I just flipped. And I just went, fellas, just off, will you? You're the most annoying shit and there's absolutely no one in this club like you. And it was one of those kind of moments, and I woke up the next morning going, bloody hell, what did I say? I'm probably going to get fired or whatever the case may be. After that, around the training ground, he was absolutely brilliant with me. Craig Bellamy was kind of like a minor bully, and as soon as you stood up to him or you went toe-to-toe with him, you gained his respect, and then he never bothered you again after that. So after that, I got on quite well with Craig Bellamy. But to answer your question, I'd been at the BBC, and at that time, there was only a couple of football clubs in the Premier League had their own TV channels, and Manchester United, MUTV, was one of them. Now, to have your own club TV channel was a very, very expensive proposition, so you had to be guaranteed of a big fan base, international fan base like Manchester United had, to get the subscriptions. Newcastle didn't have a big enough fan base at that time internationally to get the subscriptions. Now, technology was just coming in then. And they'd created technology whereby, and this was the beginning of what we are now. You know, here we are today on Zoom, and this will be broadcast on Facebook and YouTube, and, you know, all those things just didn't exist back in 2000. So this was the beginning of all that. What they had was technology that enabled you to broadcast interviews with players or content onto your own club website. And that's where it began. And the funny thing was, and I'll never forget these conversations. Other journalists used to say to me at the time, what are you doing this for? Like, are you mad? So the size of the screen was the size of a credit card or a debit card at that time.
That's tiny.
And it's tiny. And the picture was constantly pixelated, milky. But also as well, you got to remember, most connections were 56K dial-up at that time. In the late 90s, 2000s. So, you know, it was that... You had to wait, you know, for it. And I'll never forget, because we were in Champions League, it was planes, trains, and automobiles. My average utilities bill at that time was approximately £10 per month for everything.
Well, because you were never home.
I was never home. I was like coming back, putting my clothes in the washing machine, drying them, packing, and then straight back to the airport again, because we'd fly down to Biggin Hill in London to go do a London game, or fly to the South Coast to play Southampton or Portsmouth or whatever, or fly to Europe. So we were going to Europe, and we would do an interview with a player in training or at the press conference or, you know, around the team hotel. And then we would have to upload that clip. And the clips were only 20 to 30 second sound bites of the player. And we would set the upload going. So there was myself and another guy who was like a techie audio producer kind of guy. Mm-hmm. He and I would go and travel to these games. We would set it up loading at like 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And it would usually have finished by the time we woke up at 6 or 7.
Wow.
That shows you the difference in technology. Now, people said at the time to me, this is a total waste of your career and your time. I don't know why you're doing this, because nobody will watch this. no one will watch a debit card-sized video that's pixelated and milky. And they were right to a certain extent. But my answer was always, it never will get any worse. Every year that goes by, the technology gets better. Mm-hmm. So to bring the whole thing full circle, the whole story full circle, I'm now working with Facebook, and it's amazing the deja vu feeling I had, not this season, but last season, when this all started. And people said, like, I'm sorry, but football, it just won't work on this platform or any of these platforms. It will always be via a set-top box and a satellite dish.
Yeah.
Bollocks. Bollocks. And the reason it's bullshit is that the same excuse, for want of a word, is being given now as it was given to me back in the early 2000s, which is the reason I will not watch La Liga on Facebook is the quality is just not good enough, for what I want. I have a 55-inch plasma and I want to watch HD and all the rest of it. My response is exactly the same. This is the worst it will ever be, because every year that goes by, the connections are faster, they're more reliable, the quality. Remember, YouTube was 140K. I think it was 140K when it first started, if I remember. YouTube. It might be less. FPS. And what is it now? It's like you can watch 4K on YouTube.
Yeah.
So do you understand
8K.
how my career story in that regard has come full circle? It's weird, isn't it?
You just stole my words, my answer to what I say about VAR. It sucks right now. It can't be any worse. It's just going to be better and better going forward. And as an English supporter, I'm sure there are a lot of decisions in the past that, had there been VAR, would have gone England's way, with the Maradona handball and a bunch of others, I'm guessing.
I was there in South Africa at the World Cup in 2010 when Frank Lampard hit the crossbar and the ball crossed the line.
Okay, so there's one more very important question I want to ask you about Newcastle and what's happening right now, but we're just going to quickly go into a break, very short, just try and find that one cup of tea for all of us and then come back.
Are you looking for India's most awesome cricket podcast? Are you now tired of listening to the same old guys drone on about cricket everywhere? Edges and Sledges is a weekly cricket podcast hosted by three fans of the game, Varun, DJ, and myself, Ashwin. It was established in early 2018, has over 60 episodes now, and is of course now proud to be on the IVM Podcast Network. Each week, we get together from three different time zones, the USA, the UK, and Singapore, and we talk about things from the world of cricket, with a focus on Indian cricket. We often interview special guests from all around the world, including former cricketers and cricket media personalities. So check out Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast, now on the IVM network.
Okay, guys, welcome back. We still have Joe Morrison with us. We're not letting him go anywhere. Joe, we were talking about Newcastle earlier, and we've been hearing about an impending takeover that's happening. Of course, every day there's a new news report that keeps coming on with the amount of money that's coming in. What's Mike Ashley's take? Should you take the Saudi money? Should you not take the Saudi money? I want, as for you as a Newcastle fan and for other fans like you who've been wanting to see the club go back to its so-called glory days, and Mike Ashley's been trying to sell the club for a few years now. A, what is your take on that? And B, if that really happens, do you really believe the reports that are coming out, you'll have people like Max Allegri or a Mauricio Pochettino or an Antoine Griezmann or an Edinson Cavani coming into the club? Do we take it as a next Man City or what's been happening at Everton if the money comes into Newcastle?
Yeah, great question. There's a couple of parts to your question. One is, how do I feel about it? Elated, but I'm really nervous. I don't know when this is being broadcast, but if it's still before the final decision and everything's signed, sealed, and delivered, let me tell you, my arse is twitching at the moment. So I am a little bit jumpy and a little bit nervous because many things can happen. The fit and proper persons test, or the director's test, as they call it now in the English Premier League. Also, as well, since you've got to remember, these talks haven't just happened in the last couple of weeks since the news has kind of become in the public, come into the public domain. They've been going on for months and months and months. Well, a year ago, the oil price was way up at whatever it was, $70 a barrel. This last week, it was down at $10 a barrel. So, and that plays a big part in it because you're talking about a lot of money coming from a government wealth fund, not from a private businessman who may have nothing to do with the oil industry. So that bit makes me worried a little bit. You know, they can... I've heard journalists talking bullshit the last couple of days saying, yes, but they can't pull out now. They put down a 17 million pounds sterling non-refundable deposit. Do you think the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia cares if they lose 17 million pounds sterling of a non-refundable deposit? They have that kind of cash down the back of their sofa. So, so that, you know, the deal is not done until the deal is done. So that's the first part. The second part of your question about it being another Manchester City, no, is the straight answer. The reason being that there wasn't financial fair play when Manchester City, when the Al Nahyan family took over, or the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority took over Manchester City. And then when it did come in, just a couple of years later, it wasn't policed in the same way that it is now. You know, UEFA are watching everything now and they're questioning everything. So when it did come in, they used to say, right, if you want to spend X amount of money, you've got to have Y amount of money coming into the club. Well, all Abu Dhabi Investment Fund did was they just doubled the sponsorship of the national airline. So to get around the rules. Now they're clamping down on all that. So any Newcastle fan that thinks it's going to be a repeat of Manchester City is deluded. Will it be a jump up in terms of investment from what they've had already? Yes, of course it will be. You'll see a huge increase in financial investment into the playing squad, into the club, into everything. But it won't be, you know, we're not going to see Robinho arriving at St. James's Park.
Oh, I think, didn't he go to Chelsea? No, that was what Robinho thought. He went to Chelsea, but no, he came to Man City, didn't he?
I don't think he knew anything, did he? No, I was watching the documentary the other day. It was good.
Which documentary? Robinho has a documentary.
No. I'll tell you what it was. It was
Chelsea or nothing.
No. It was a really good. It was on YouTube, and it's called Transfer Talk. It's a thing that they do of Sky Sports, and it's on YouTube. Transfer Deadline Day or Transfer Deadline Day Talks, and basically what they do is many years after the event, they go back to players and managers and directors and talk to them about a specific signing that happened on the final day of the transfer window. So it was an interview with Gary Cook, who was the chief executive of Manchester City, and they were talking about the Robinho deal. It was really interesting because, you know, that's the part of football. I've seen it inside, you know, things that happened at the close of the transfer window when I was at Newcastle United that weren't out in the public domain. And obviously, you know, when I joined Newcastle United, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, as you'd expect. And, you know, you couldn't say anything, otherwise you'd be sued. So it's interesting going back and speaking to all those characters who made a big money move or a move that caused so much, you know, breaking news and so much furore at the time, 10 years ago. And now they're sitting them down in the cool light of day many years after and getting them to talk through what happened and how and why. It's really interesting. Anyone who's fascinated by the business of football should watch those kind of things.
Yeah, I'm for sure going to look for Andy Carroll and a couple of similar names, and maybe even Kim Karlstrom, if you guys remember him. He came for exactly one game at the Arsenal. I'm going to surely look that up. Karthik.
Yeah, I wanted to, Joe, when I went on your Wikipedia page, there's this point, I think this was at Newcastle.
It's all lies. It's all lies.
But it says you interviewed Pele there. So is that truth or false?
That's true.
I have not been able to find it though. So how was that interview? Here you are interviewing who's considered arguably the greatest footballer there ever is. Mm-hmm. How was that experience? I mean, obviously, probably when you were growing up, you would have heard about him.
The reason that you probably can't see, that'll be somewhere in, by the way, I don't know where or what or how the archive of all of that stuff that we did at Newcastle United, where it is now. Because remember, again, it was something that maybe went on the website It's probably not on the website has probably been changed a number of times over the years. Maybe they've had a different website designer, provider. So I don't know where all that archive is. There'll be tape somewhere in St. James's Park with those interviews on, because it was before the social media platform days. It was before the YouTube days. So it's a good question, though. I'd love to know. I'll tell you one thing. There was a player at Newcastle called Andy Griffin. And so we had, in my job, I had to cover not only the first team, but also the reserve team as well. So, someone asked me a couple of weeks ago, how many games have you been to? So they asked me two questions. How many games have you been to live? And how many shows have you done live? And I said, you know what? I honestly don't know. And then a couple of days later, I was trying to do a rough kind of calculation going back over all the years. And I came to a rough conclusion that I've done approximately 6,000 shows, live shows, and I've been to approximately 2,500 games, watched 2,500 games live over this whole 20-year span. And the reason was that I wasn't just going to the first team matches, I was going to reserve games. We had to go to academy games sometimes. So it was like, 1, 2, 3, every sort of match day, whether it be midweek, weekend or whatever, we're doing half a dozen games a week, maybe 7 games a week, something like that, depending. So anyway, Andy Griffin was coming back from injury and he played in a reserve match, and he just, as the saying goes, he lost his shit. And he just started battering this opposition player who tackled him really badly. And it was like watching Mike Tyson. He was just absolutely smashing him. Now, because it was a reserve game and it was away from home, there was like one man and his dog in the stand, and we had to film all of the games. We had to film the games just with a, semi-professional camera. We had to film all the games for 2 reasons. One was to get some content to put on the website to say this was the goal, that the reserves, won the game last night. And the other was the videos were given to the technical staff, who maybe wanted to look at some players, but they weren't at the game. So they wanted to analyze the players and see how these players were. So I'll never forget having to go, and obviously word had got back to Sir Bobby Robson that Andy Griffin had punched the living hell out of this opposition player, and he was probably going to be banned. It was so bad. It wasn't like he slapped him, like you normally see. He'd actually hit him a dozen times. Oh. And the news got back to Sir Bobby Robson, and there had to be an internal investigation. And Sir Bobby wanted to see the video to see what had happened for himself, and word had got round the dressing room at training ground, and all the players wanted to see this as well. And I'll never forget. So we had this little office, a little editing office, where we did our broadcasts and edited the video. And it was a tiny little room, maybe sort of 12 foot square, something like that. And the entire first team training squad was packed into this room with Sir Bobby Robson at the front. And of course, he was like a headmaster, shaking his head, going, disgraceful. You brought shame upon the club. And the rest of the squad were behind him going, and then they started counting the punches. So can you imagine a squad of 30 plus players all going in unison, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it got to 12 and they all went, way!
Yeah, quick question. Who was responsible for showing Lee Boyer that video?
That was surreal, man.
So
that was the most surreal game.
We really want to know what happened in that game between Newcastle and Aston Villa. What got into Lee Boyer? All that we know about those punches being thrown is from what we read on Wikipedia, which has just been termed as lies or something else. But what really went? What happened there?
Well, I'm not in the head of Lee Bowyer or Kieran Dyer, but you could tell tension had been building. Newcastle were just having a bit of a wobble at that time in the league. And now, here's one thing that fans need to know. There wouldn't be a month would go by without a fight on a training ground. It still happens today. You've got men who are young men, very young men, who are very highly paid, have huge egos and therefore confidence, are testosterone fueled, they're competitive, they're winners, and they're in a physical job, a physical environment. They're not sending emails in an office. So if someone feels like a tackle was a little bit over the top or aggrieved or whatever, it just explodes. And you put on top of that the cherry on the cake, if you like, this group of young, testosterone-fueled, aggressive, competitive guys are competing for 11 places in the team. So someone might be pushing for your spot. And of course, every football club management actually encourages this environment of competitiveness so that you get the best standards of, those who want to be in the match day squad on the Saturday. So things had been bubbling under the surface for a while before that. We felt it inside the club. Things weren't right. And what sparked it, in my opinion, was Stephen Taylor getting sent off. So Stephen Taylor handled the ball, if you remember.
And he felt like he was shot by a sniper.
He felt like he was shot. It was a clear handball. He was sent off. So that just made everything go from back to worse. And it was ridiculous, by the way. So he was sent off. Now, the funniest thing about this whole story is that Stephen Taylor didn't even realize any of this was going on because there was no TV screen in the dressing room or anything like that. He'd walked down the tunnel. So Newcastle United's tunnel goes down a few steps, then along, then up a series of steps. And then the dressing rooms, or they used to be, the dressing rooms were at the top on either side. Mm-hmm. So he was getting changed and, feeling sorry for himself. And then those two came into the dressing room and he was like, what the why are you here?
That is so funny.
But it was just, you couldn't make that up. I don't think it's happened since. I've heard of players who've got a little bit agitated with each other during a game, but and the thing was, after the event, like weeks after the event, there was no animosity between the two of them. There was nothing. It was just one of those flashpoint moments.
I think they ended up at West Ham together much later or something like that. I think they were bought 1 year after the other or between two transfer windows. And they ended up at the same club again eventually after they left Newcastle.
Yeah. It was weird. It was a very weird, a very surreal, weird kind of day. I've never seen anything like that in my life.
Yeah, that was amazing.
We can't stop Joe from talking, but the other two have stopped me from talking. So that was our first episode with Joe Morrison. We're going to come back with episode 2, a discussion that is being taken forward with Joe. A lot more in there. We're going to talk about his association and his understanding and knowledge about Indian football. A lot about how he keeps his calm when he's shooting with Baji. A lot more about Baji, actually. But that's all in episode 2. Don't forget to tune in, guys.
So if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I'm Fickleberry Hun on Twitter and Instagram. That's Huckleberry Finn, but Fickle.
And if you want to reach out to me, I am Sapre on Twitter and G Sapre on Instagram.
You can reach out to me at iRant, which is IYERANT on Twitter and Instagram. This is Football Shootball. Recognize.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
Beta, did you know 79% of all scientists in NASA are Indian only?
देखो, इंडिया में टैक्स सिर्फ मिडिल क्लास भरती है. Everyone is just enjoying free यार.
आजकल के youngsters are only interested in partying and enjoying. उनको देश की पड़ी ही नहीं है.
बेटा तुम बस शादी कर लो, उसके बाद तो you can enjoy life like anything.
I will tell you what this country needs. This country needs 15 years of dictatorship. That is the only way to become a superpower. See the Chinese, how much they've progressed.
सुनो, तुमने ये WhatsApp forward देखा?
So what's common between all of these statements?
They're all absolutely rubbish.
Fake WhatsApp forwards that spread like wildfire.
And statements that defy any logic.
They are here to debunk them all.
Way of family WhatsApp groups, worst nightmare.
We're what happens when you read a book.
Basically, we're just a bunch of guys who want to cut through the bullshit of everyone saying this, how it won't be true.
So that the next time someone confidently squeezes out some WhatsApp or Twitter BS, you can look them dead in the eye and go, Uncle, please sit.
So join me, Joel.
And me, Tushar.
Every Mondays for a fresh new episode of Uncle, Please Sit.